Yeah, I don't know.
Okay, we are now officially live. So we're definitely. So we're going to take a second. I want to welcome everyone to Book Chat with Carrie Nichols and myself, Lucy Monroe. This month, we're talking about our favorite historicals, and I am so excited about our panel this month and everyone who is here. We will be going around and introducing ourselves. So I am Lucy Monroe. I write lots of different types of romance, and my current book out right now is a paranormal historical set in the Regency era called Highlander's Moon. And I would like to throw it over to Diane and ask her to introduce herself. And we'll go around, and Carrie, you'll be the last one. Sound good? Okay.
Hi, I'm Diane Freeman. I write the Countess of Harley mystery series. It's a traditional historical series. Kind of fun whodunit set in the very, very end of the, we got a picture of it, of the Victorian era. My latest book out is A Bride's Guide to Marriage and Murder. And Frances and George are finally getting married, and they actually do get married. I will give you a spoiler and tell you that, but there could be a surprise at their wedding.
It's a surprise.
All right, Piper, you're next.
I'm Piper Huguley, and I've written two historical romance series called Home to Milford College, and what was the other one called? Oh, Migrations of the Heart.
Yeah, I don't know which one this is.
that's Home to Milford College.
Okay.
And my current release is called By Her Own Design, which is a biographical historical fiction about the life of Anne Lowe, the Black woman who designed Jacqueline Kennedy's wedding dress.
That's so good. Allison?
My name is Allison Mclean. I am a historical romance writer, and I write Scottish historical romances. Here's number 2. My series is, this is the last book in the series. It's called Highland Thief. This one came out last summer. And that's it.
All right, Carrie.
I write under Carrie Nichols for Harlequin Special Edition. It's small town with some humor in it. And I think this is still on the shelves. This was an August release, so you might still be able to find it at Walmart. It might still be there. It's actually, this is an older one. It's His Unexpected Twins. It's a reprint, but that's what's currently out.
Very good book. I just wanted to say that Marcia says hello or good morning to everyone, and so does Alicia.
Oh,
so we've got
hi.
Hi. And I'm just, I love historical novels. Carrie and I are really excited to have this book chat because it is something that we both read and enjoy, depending on, like we have our favorite, everyone has their favorite, I think, eras, people, whatever, which we'll talk about later, I think, some of the things that we love about it. But we're going to start by talking about our favorites, the stories that we kind of recommend you read if you haven't read yet. And I am going to jump in there this time because I'm so excited about Diane's series. I was recommended by Joanne Ross to read this, to read one of her books, and I did. And it was already on my wish list, but I hadn't read it yet because y'all know, I mean, not all of you, but most of you guys know that I have migraines and that I really have limited reading time because of eye strain. And so I do a lot of audio reading, and I read on my Kindle and have the type really big. It's like 3 sentences and swipe for the next page. But it's all good. But anyway, so I read her book and I loved it so much that I glommed the entire series in like 2 weeks. And then I had to wait for the final book to come out. And then I read it like the first day it was out. It's such a good historical series. I really love it. So if you like cozy mystery, if you like a little smidge of romance, which I have to say, Diane, I think you get the perfect amount for a cozy mystery. I get quite frustrated with some cozy mysteries who when you read it, you can tell the author's trying to get that romance in there, but doesn't really know how to do it. And so they don't do it well. So they do the cozy mystery really well, but the romance, you get it all. The balance is fantastic.
Thank you.
And I was just listening to a book. One of my favorite Regency authors is Marion Chesney although she is passed, but she's still one of my favorite authors. And I was listening to, I had not realized that she had done a cozy mystery set in the Edwardian period. And I started listening to that series yesterday. And actually, not yesterday, 3 days ago, because I finished the book in like a day. It was her writing was so good. And I'm going to talk about her later too, and why I love historicals and things I love about it. But so those are like my big recommendations, is these amazing cozy mysteries.
Did she
I
write
have
some
no idea.
mystery that's now a TV series?
Yes, she wrote as MC Beaton, and she wrote the Agatha Raisin mysteries. And
Oh,
she
Agatha
wrote
Raisin.
the
that was it.
Hamish, the detective.
Yes, Hamish Macbeth, I think.
Hamish Macbeth, right? Yes, she wrote those books.
I knew she
I
sounded
hear about that.
familiar.
Yes, but she wrote under a different name. But
Yeah.
as like Mary Jo Putney writes as MJ Putney, I think, for that paranormal historical that she's done. Anyway, let's go to someone else about what you want to recommend. Anyone want to just pop up and go first?
Sure, I will.
Go ahead.
Okay. I really, really put a lot of thought. That's like 2 books, only 2
Right?
books,
Yes.
all historical mysteries. So I'm like, okay, who's going to be the audience? Well, they probably like straight up historical fiction, historical romance, and then I've got that little niche of historical mystery. So I picked a series for my first one, and it's the Secret History of the Pink Carnation series by Lauren Willick. And my books are scattered all over the place. The book that I actually have is book number 6, The Mystery or the Mischief of the Mistletoe, because, it's late September, and that means October, and that means Halloween, and that means we're all doing Christmas shopping. So this is true. And the good thing, I'll kind of talk about it as a series. It's kind of a dual timeline, but the current era is very, very small. It's like maybe 10% of the books, and the rest of it is historical. And it's Eloise, who is an American researcher, trying to find out about, I believe, the purple gentian. And she runs into Colin via her research, who lives in the house that the purple gentian used to live in. So then you go back in time and you get these stories. There is a romance in every one. This particular one is with the school teacher, Arabella Dempsey, and Turnip Fitzhugh. And what's really cool is this is, like I said, book 6. Turnip has been in about 3 of the books prior to this. So her characters just keep showing up, and they come back, and they become a family. So you really get to know them. And I just adore it. Turnip is that kind of big, dumb guy who just turns out to be such a sweetheart. And so my favorite Pink Carnation book, that would be this one. My second book, is it okay for me to keep going into the second one?
Yep.
Okay. This is new. It will not actually be out until November. It's the second book in the Phillida Bright mystery. And what is it? Poison. By Colleen Cambridge. Colleen also writes as C.M. Gleason, and I believe Colleen Gleason as well. This is a new series for her. The first book came out last year, and it Agatha Christie's housekeeper is solving crime.
Great idea.
Okay,
Oh,
that's a great idea.
There's in this particular book, there are all
love
your
it.
favorite writers from this particular era who write mystery, because
That's cool.
there is a big, I don't know what they're calling it, like a mystery extravaganza, detective expo. So they're all showing up for this, and somebody is killed. And so here are all these expert writers trying to solve this crime. But Phillida Bright actually does it best. It comes out in November. I highly, highly recommend it. But you can always go and
write that down.
Yeah.
The first one is Murder at Malowin Hall, which is the fake Agatha Christie's home.
Right.
Okay.
Wonderful, wonderful series. I'm really looking forward to the next one.
That
Those are my
sounds
2.
so good. I love that. Okay, someone next.
I'll go. So I decided to go backwards, and I chose two books that Julie Garwood wrote. And she wrote them in, The Bride was written in 1989. I think that was the date. Julie Garwood's The Bride. And the other one I chose was The Prize. And this was written in 1991. They're the first books I read that I mean, obviously I'm a voracious reader, especially when I was younger and, before I had kids. And so you find the characters and you find the stories that you love. But this was the first historicals that I read where I was just overwhelmed with the joy at the end that you feel when you read a really, really great romance. And both of her books are set in medieval times. The Prize is set in, the hero is, he's a Norman and the heroine is a Saxon. And so it starts off with he is attacking her castle and she's got a slingshot and he gets off his horse to do something. I think he saves one of his soldiers. He pulls one of his soldiers that's drowning in the moat. And he pulls him out and he takes off his helmet for a second and he gets hit in the head with the stone that she's shot with her slingshot from her castle wall. And she knows that she doesn't have, that they're going to be defeated. She knows that by now. The character is called Royce, Baron Royce. And so he is the fourth Baron to come and try and take her castle. And she's basically pushed back every other Baron that tried to do it. And so Baron finally gets in there and he's being told that there are twin sisters, one of whom is a nun. So he goes in there and there's a very serene nun. She's got her habit on. And she's asking him to be kind to her sister and, she's impetuous and, don't hurt her kind of thing. And he goes off to do something. And by the time he comes back, his men who were sort of besotted with this nun have taken her to the sanctuary, or not to sanctuary, but to the nunnery where she claims sanctuary. And of course, by that time, he's figured out that there was no twin sister, that it was Nicola all along. And this is how the story starts. And so she's claimed sanctuary and she's there and he has to figure out a way to get her out of sanctuary. So he doesn't know it's her nephew, but a baby that she was holding initially when he went to speak to her. And of course she has to come out of, because she's afraid he'll do something to the baby. And then what it is it's called The Prize because he is tasked with taking her to London to the court of, I think it's Henry,
William.
But I could be wrong. William? Okay. And she is going to be given away in essence as a prize, in marriage, along with her holdings. And she obviously doesn't want this and she's very nervous. And she spent a week with Royce trying to escape on the trip down to London. And they've developed this banter between them. And they have this thing where they always say to each other, checkmate. And so it's when they're in a situation and he finally gets her to London, the last thing he says to her is he says checkmate. And then what's funny is, so she's in the main hall with all the lords and the ones who want her hand in marriage are going to fight for her, and Royce doesn't speak up that he's going to fight for her as well. And then she saves some of the little kids that are the niece of the queen, and she is then given the right to choose her own husband. So she has some agency. And so at that point, it's this wonderful scene, and you're just smiling the whole time as you read it, where she's walking through the hall past all the barons who think she should choose them for whatever reason. And she gets to Royce, and Royce is like just shaking his head. He's doing this to her, and she's nodding her head, and she just looks at him and she says, checkmate. And so she's now trapped him in marriage. And of course, becomes a love match, and they have this constant battle between each other where he has to learn to bend. He always sets her down for a lecture and he says marriage is like a map, and she doodles off in her head and doesn't really listen, but she's letting him lecture and have that feeling. And it's just wonderful. It has this feeling at the end as you're reading, and you just love it. I will say that the books in this time frame that came out sort of in the 80s and the 90s and probably before that, they're written a little bit differently than they are now. And so when I first read it, there's a lot of different point of views. I didn't even pick up on that when I was just a reader. Right. When I became a writer, then I was like, so we're in whose point? So that you become, because you're trained in a different way. you let all that go, and it's just these wonderful characters, and they have this banter, and she's always got a new plan. She's going ahead to try and control him in some way or manipulate him, and it ends up that, of course, they're in love, and he bends and she bends, and they have this a love marriage at the end. So, and they have to, of course, sort out the whole Saxon Norman thing, and that gets sorted out. So that was The Prize. The first Julie Garwood book that I read that I just loved. And the second one that I chose was also Julie Garwood, and it's called The Bride. This was a hard one to choose because The Prize was kind of obvious to me because it was the first one of Julie's that I read that I loved. But then she wrote so many more set in Scotland, and I write Scottish historical romance. So I finished reading all of her Scottish books, and you just knew that I was going to try and write a Scottish historical romance at that point. And so it's the same thing. She's written this strong, willful heroine, and they're confined in historicals. Like, that's, I find, what's interesting about writing some historicals is how do they find their agency? Because I have to somehow.
Yeah.
In essence, they're chattel back in the Middle Ages. They belong to their husbands. The whole thing in The Bride is that the wives rank below the horses, kind of thing. So, and it's the same thing. She causes Alec is the hero. The heroine is Jamie, and she's English. He's a Scottish laird, and their kings determine that they both have to marry. So neither of them want to marry, but they do. And then they're sort of delighted. They end up delighted with each other, and lots of fun stuff. I don't want to take up too much time, but I will just say that the Bride gives that same feeling as you're reading it as The Prize does as well. Just you end the books and you just happy sigh, you put it down. And I'm not one who reads many books over and over and over. And for me to read a book 3 times is a lot. So I've probably read, Julie Garwood's 3 or 4 times, and I read them again for this chat, so I'd have it in my mind. And they're such great books.
They really are delightful.
Yeah, delightful. That's the word for it. Yeah. Characters are so engaging, and she always has these gruff heroes and these heroines who kind of bring them to their knees.
I love it. Yeah. Okay, Piper, do you want to go next? We'll have Carrie wrap us up. Does that sound good?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, sure. I since I with my newest release, By Her Own Design, is what we call a biographical historical fiction. Been into the work that these novels are doing, fictitious novels, but based on true history. Yeah. Interested in the work that they're doing in terms of more or less sort of recovering to the imagination the lives of women who have either been overlooked or erased from history, but still managed to do great things. But the 2 that I have on my mind today that are going to be released upcoming are about relatively recent women. The first one is One True Wish by Tricia Thomas. And this book is about the life of Diane Carroll, the actress.
Oh, okay.
And in the realm of biographical historical fiction, people who write it, we all have this thing where it's not like it's competing for subjects, but it is like we're wondering, okay, here's this great historical story. Who's going to write it or whatever. So I had this story in my mind for a long time, but knew that it wasn't going to be possible to write it, at least until Sidney Poitier died, because Diane Carroll and Sidney Poitier, some people may know or not know, had a great love affair when they were both married to other people. And it's a very torrid Hollywood story. And I was like rubbing my hands, was like, oh my God. I said, I wasn't trying to curse Sidney Poitier to dying or whatever, but I just knew that.
Poor Sidney. Now we know what happened to him.
Yeah, it wasn't that he was in his 90s. No, it wasn't.
No. That had nothing to do with it.
It's this little woman in Georgia that was like, story, But come to my mind that Tricia beat us all to it. And it's a very amazing story because Diane Carroll was an actress much beloved. Of course, she died several years ago before Sidney Poitier did. And she probably had that idea in mind at that particular point in time when Diane Carroll died, surely, that that this would be a great story in terms of just the way he came into her life and just really just took stuff over. And they made a pact that they were going to leave their spouses, and Diane did, and Sidney didn't. And yeah, I mean, this is all this, like juicy Hollywood stuff with these two great people. If you ever have seen the movie Paris Blues, then you'll see the chemistry of those two in action, and it's just like, oh my gosh, I know they were doing it when the cameras were
I mean,
it's a great movie otherwise, because there's all of this stuff about mid 20th century jazz in it in Paris. It's set against that backdrop, and not only do you get Diane Carroll and Sidney Poitier lusting for each other, but you also get Paul Newman and Joanne Woodward lusting for each other. It's these two couples in Paris. Both, it's just dripping with lust, that movie, in terms of that. But Once Your Wish is Diane's story from her point of view, and how she, as a young woman, came to do the impossible, to be a successful Black woman in Hollywood when such a thing was not even considered possible. So that was my first biographical historical fiction. That comes out in November. The second one is, it's not going to show up because it's not a start, Jacqueline in Paris by Anne Ma. So you can see Anne Ma's name because it shows up, but Jacqueline in Paris doesn't show up as well, my e-reader. It's coming out on Tuesday, and it's about Jacqueline Bouvier. I sort of call this the year of the Jackie books because my book features her as a young woman, and this features her as a young woman when she took her year in France. And it's set against, a Paris just after the World War II, where, things were really not going very well for France, in terms of just after the war. But her coming to her awareness of who she is as a young woman, what she wants to do, all of that kind of stuff. So it's a very interesting look at her in terms of her earlier life. I was going to call it that because Anne did one, and then another author did Jackie and Me. Again, pre-Jack stuff, or when she just meets him. So for these histories of great women, in terms of what you're looking for, those would be the two I would recommend.
Those sound great. I wrote them down.
Yeah, and
I wrote down the movie.
I'm gonna look
at
the
movie. Yeah.
That's awesome. Okay, Carol. I'm Carrie. Let's hear it.
Okay,
He's our official book pimp, y'all.
This one is on a lot of people's best historicals, Lord of Scoundrels. And everybody's, it's wonderful. And I thought, sometimes, when you hear so much about it and then you read it and you're like, what was all the fuss about? But no, I loved it. And I really do. And I loved how he's this big, horrible brute, actually. And she manages to manipulate him with kindness, really. She's very agreeable. And, she's to the point where she's just so agreeable, he can't stand it.
That's what it's like in The Bride, too.
Yeah. And then the other one is, I had trouble picking one Lisa Kleypas, but I picked Marrying Winterbourne because he's also a big brute, I guess, too, but he was really interested in her, and she was just very shy, and he misunderstood her shyness for, she just doesn't like me because I'm Welsh and I'm not high society and all of this, but she really did like him. And so when he kind of backed off, she's like, wait a minute. And then her family's like, oh, you don't want him anyway. And she's like, yeah, I do. So what she did was she went and schemed and had him ruin her. So their family couldn't say no. They
Yeah.
had to allow the marriage.
All of
And
that happened.
I love that she just took it upon herself and went to him and
It
I want you to
happened.
ruin me. He says, well, you know what's going to happen. And she said, yeah, that's what I want you to ruin.
I feel like that's the perfect segue into our question about your favorite historical tropes. Honestly, what are your favorite historical tropes, y'all? Because that right there, what you were just talking about, is catnip for me.
Yes.
So just hop in with what a favorite historical trope. And the thing is, it doesn't have to be romance. It doesn't have to be mystery. It could be any historical concept. Piper, you lit on it a little bit, that you love the concept of historicals bringing out history that we don't know about, women that got erased or weren't talked about or whatever. And like, that's awesome. I know it's one of my favorite too, but so go ahead and share others that we haven't already talked about.
Well, I always love the grumpy sunshine trope. That's one of my favorites in no matter what historical romance genre or any romance genre. And I find in the historical, it works really well because, he has to be usually the big protector, and they're very often a warrior and stoic. And if he were a man who yelled and screamed and hit, of course, he wouldn't be a hero. So he's usually very controlled. And she comes in, the heroine, and just sort of knocks his knees out from under him, like Carrie was saying, almost that with that pleasantness or with the kindness or with they're not always pleasant and kind. I mean, a lot of Julie's characters aren't that way. They're impetuous or and it's this clash of somebody trying to control versus somebody trying to get in there and be passionate. And so the grumpy sunshine, that's what I think of as that. It's one of my favorite tropes.
I like both in historical and modern contemporary.
Yes.
Well, one trope I like that it's hard to pull it off in a contemporary is marriage of convenience.
Yes, that's hard.
Exactly. That's in a lot
I
of
really love as a
historicals.
historical trope, which I've written before. That's a lot of fun.
I think one of my very favorite historical tropes is it's the woman who finds agency. We talked about that a little bit, but it is reading about, and I don't really care what genre I'm reading in, it's that woman who doesn't buckle. I found so beautiful in Diane's books. The Countess of Harley, gosh, you just got to read the first book in this series, because she just goes from being a person who sort of subliminated herself for the sake of family to being her own person by the end of the book. And that is like probably my favorite trope in historicals, because you just use it. I think it's because it gives so much hope. It's like if a woman in that was the end of the Victorian era or in the Regency era or the medieval era or whatever, a woman during a time when there were so much against her having legal agency over her own life could manage that. You put the book down and think, what can I do? Who can I be?
I agree.
If that woman could do this. So that's one of my favorite tropes. I did want to mention real quick that Marcia said I must confess, I haven't read historicals in a long time, but all the mentioned titles are tempting me to read them again. Yay! But back to the tropes. Anyone else want to talk about favorite tropes?
Yeah, along with what you were saying, Lucy, one of the things that and this can be romance, this can be straight historical fiction, this can be a mystery, is social upheaval. Like that often gives the woman that opportunity to gain agency. Frances would never have been at all if there weren't a lot of social upheaval going on in England at that time. The Industrial Revolution, people were leaving these huge estates, and you couldn't get someone to work as a servant because they could make a lot more money in a factory. So they had to open their wallets, pay more money. The roof needs repair. Things are costing more. They were in an agricultural recession because the US was pumping out all this cheap grain. And so they kind of needed to find a woman to marry who could bring a bunch of money into the family coffers. But it's like every every era has some sort of point where there's just that shift,
Yes.
that little bit of change. And I just love novels that jump on that.
Yeah.
It's just
When
makes
you
every
learn
time
something,
fantastic.
right?
Yeah.
Because when they jump on it, like you do that, you talk about these things that are happening and get into the subconscious of the reader with information that maybe we wouldn't have had, or I mean, just depending on who the readers. I love that. Anyway, we'll talk about that in a little bit.
And
But
it's a thing that I think historical romance takes a lot of critique for, particularly I think for people who don't read it.
Yeah.
But one of the things that I always think about in terms of any kind of fiction is that the protagonist is always going to be someone who is outside of the norm. So this is always the thing about historical romance where people say, well,
Yes.
they're like 21st
Right.
century women, but they're not like women like that or whatever. But there always was going to be
Yes.
some outsider, someone
Yeah.
who always did not obey. And that's who
Yeah.
the stories
Yeah.
get told
Yeah.
about.
It's
Yeah.
the
And,
people
you know,
who bucked convention. This
Mhm.
were when you read a historical novel, it's not anachronistic to that historical time. It is about those individuals. It's like this kind of a personal thing, but I always said, you know, like I grew up in a time when spousal abuse was pretty normal, right? But there were men that never did it.
Mhm.
And so you could write about that time and write about a man who thought it was awful and disgusting. And it would be totally realistic to write that story because those men existed.
Mhm.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that they were the majority, you know, like, but that's probably a little too personal.
But yeah,
Yeah.
No, it's true.
I say this a lot too, is that if normal, everyday, respectable women didn't push those boundaries every now and then and do
Yes.
things that were not allowed,
Yes.
we still would not be doing those things.
That's
You
exactly
still
right.
would
Yeah,
not be able to
somebody
go
had
to a
to-
restaurant
Right.
with just girls. You
Yeah,
know, things like,
yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
something
yeah.
that simple. If women didn't do it, we still
Yeah.
wouldn't be doing it because
Yeah,
nobody just
somebody had
gives
to
you
go
That's
first.
exactly
Somebody
right.
had to. Yeah.
Yeah,
Somebody
Someone
to
had
push
to
it.
instigate the change, and that's
a lot of someone's.
Yes.
exactly,
Yeah,
and
Mhm.
all
yeah.
over pockets. And like when
Yeah.
Allison, you were talking about the Scottish historicals that Julie wrote. She wrote about characters who questioned their time, but they were reflective of a lot. If you read letters and stuff written by nuns and abbesses back from that time,
Mhm.
they were pushing the boundaries, and they didn't agree with certain things. They didn't agree with the church's teachings, which the church had so much political influence. And she just wrote about characters that were those people. She wrote about characters who questioned that time. And I love that. I love that about that. I just want to really quickly say, Sophie Lee Fox said, love the Countess of Harley books.
Mhm.
So do I,
Thank
obviously.
you.
But yeah. So
And
go
Oh, and I
ahead.
was going to
Go
say, it's
ahead.
also the trope of sometimes the physicality of the characters. A lot of my female characters in my historicals have this. They're expert marksmen.
Ooh,
They're
yeah. I love
expert
that. Yeah.
with horses. So they
Mhm.
have these traits that aren't maybe the gentlewoman trait. They don't want to sit inside and not that there's anything wrong with it, but do needlepoint or create a beautiful tapestry. They want to do something else. And so we write these characters that are adventurous women.
Right.
I do, and certainly Julie does as well. They have these
Mhm.
abilities to have some sort of protection of themselves because they've developed their physical capabilities.
Or they're mental, like, right? Because
Yes.
that trope can go the other way.
Getting educated, yeah.
Piper in
By her own design.
By her design. Okay,
Sure.
so Anne she definitely takes what is the norm, that life of a seamstress, but she takes it further. I was even thinking today when I put on my floral top, I was like, what influence did she have to bring this beauty into fashion, into the world that is still like we're loving it, but she stepped outside. She didn't just, and she's a real person. She said, I want to do this thing that's not just mending, not just sewing. This, I want to do things that are beautiful. I want to make, and I love that aspect of her character.
Yeah,
I do. I love that.
That's true.
So did anyone else want to add? Because we have more questions to get to, y'all.
One more trope really quickly, just to
Sure.
throw it out there, is like what Piper writes, I love real historical people
Yeah,
in
right.
fiction. I love getting a glimpse
Mhm.
of that.
Yep, for
That's
So
sure.
cool. Mhm.
Me too. Okay, so our first a question that we could ask is like, what is your favorite thing about reading historical? I think we kind of sort of covered that with our tropes, but if there's
Mhm.
something else about reading historical besides just the tropes you read, I will say that my favorite thing about reading historical is learning. Well, I'm listening to the Marion Chesney book yesterday, and she's going over. I mean, she includes recipes for how the stuff to wash your hair with. She includes how to take care of clothes. I mean, she wrote such great historical detail for the time. She was so specific. It was what was done in the Edwardian time to do this particular thing. I love that. I love every little piece of historical detail I get in any book. That's my absolute favorite part of reading a historical book, is to see what history was in a moment.
Mhm.
And I don't
That's
expect it to be
cool.
perfect. I don't get mad at authors who get things a little bit wrong here, a little bit. That's okay, because like it's my job as an individual to also read real history and to read nonfiction
Yeah.
in order to like know what's.
Agree. Yeah.
So I am not going to be all like, oh, you did this, whatever. I don't care.
I know, yeah,
love
I
the
know.
detail. I love
Sometimes Lisa Kleypas at the end of her book, she'll put in, a note, and she'll say, yes, I was a few years off with,
I love that
when
too,
this
right?
came
Love
into
that.
fashion, but it fit
Yep.
my story, so I used it.
Yeah.
And it's like,
And
yeah,
there's
so I'm not all upset over it.
yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
right.
And
Yeah.
there's certain, especially writing historical romance, there's certain expectations of the genre. So, for example, writing a Scottish historical romance, expectations of, I don't call them kilts in my books. I always call them plaids. He's wearing
Right.
his plaid.
Oh, I
But
have the
we
same
know
thing.
that we know now that the plaid wasn't actually, they weren't wearing it at the time that a lot of the historicals are written,
Right.
even Julie Garwood's books. So you
No,
get
right.
away with it.
Absolutely.
Or the idea of a certain plaid being representative of a certain
Mhm.
clan,
Mhm.
that happened quite a bit after. And
Right.
so it's the way I still want to hit those feel good expectations of the
Right.
genre, but how do I work it in? So I talk a lot about things like what plants were the weavers using
Mhm.
that were in their vicinity to make
Yeah.
that certain color of that certain plaid.
I
And
love
so you
that.
talk about if there's a weaver within the clan, what are her similarities? What colors are similar? And how does that sort of impact what might be, even though it's not completely accurate, instead of saying that it's a clan colors or the clan plaid, and it's not actually historically accurate, you can have somebody who probably creates in a certain way similar for the clan. You know what I mean?
Right. Right.
Well, that's why in historical fiction we do have that as a genre expectation, that authors note in the back, that always has that, where I took liberties, what
Yeah.
actually
Mm.
changed, what might have been true. One of the things about By Her Own Design is because Anne Lowe was involved in a child marriage. I had to talk about that some when she was 12. This kind of, just horrible kind of
Yeah.
stuff that I have to address there in terms of that. And a lot of people who have these questions, whether it's questions about, oh well, that's just a 21st century woman that you're putting in the 1600s or 1700s, is that these people often have in mind some kind of historical narrative that they've been
Yes.
taught in terms of what they think of or what they
Right.
learned in school was historically accurate, to which my
Mhm.
question always is, well, whose history are you talking about?
Yeah.
And women's
Right.
history
Good for
is
you.
not the
Yeah.
history that they're talking about
Yeah.
very often. Like
No.
you're saying, Allison, the whole thing with the concerns of the berries and how they did that, or the bits of history that you like, Lucy, in terms of what Chesney is putting in her books, that's not the history that they're thinking about at all, but that is history.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. It's true. So it's like those are, for me, that is definitely the thing I think that got me caught. And I will say Julie Garwood was the first author I read that I knew, that I recognized if I read more books by her, I would get the same kind of story. Because up to that point, I just read, I mean, I read when I was a kid, I just read the library from the first book on the bottom of the left shelf all the way around, and I did
Make me laugh.
it, and so like, but once I realized there were authors that could give me what I wanted, then I started creating my auto buy list, and I didn't even know what to call it. Like I just knew these were the authors that I would do. And when I was young, I was poor, so it's the library. It was where you
Yes,
went and
library
you
for me
got
too.
whatever.
Every Saturday, yep.
Right? And, I just, but historicals were really, I love them, and I still do. I love historical fiction. I love historical nonfiction. I have a huge, not huge, but for a personal person, a pretty big historical nonfiction library, because man, I like to read about history. And I think we learn from history, and we learn from how people perceive history. Remember, you're talking about whose history you're talking to. And I have this wonderful, wonderful book about Egyptologists over the centuries, right? But if when you read it, you see the different ways that Egyptologists dealt with the history. There were always conservation Egyptologists, which we don't hear about, because there were, the vast majority were colonialists, and they were terrible at taking things out of Egypt and interpreting the history through their own lens.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. But there were other Egyptologists that didn't. And what I love is getting like a book from someone, or reading their diaries or whatever from someone who looked at things from the perspective of the people around, and from the actual culture and society that they take the things from, and not just in Egypt, obviously, and all of the ancient cultures. I'm fascinated by the ancient Chinese culture, the ancient Middle Eastern culture. Ancient cultures are so interesting to me. And of course, in North America, I didn't even know how ancient our cultures were until I took a course this last year on it. And I was like, oh my gosh, we have cultures that go back not thousands of years, but like tens of thousands of years.
And religions that go back way
right. So it's just fascinating, and it's wonderful. So that's just a whole nother thing. What is the hardest thing about writing historicals for y'all?
Getting lost down the rabbit hole of research.
Yeah, probably.
For what ends up being like two
true.
sentences.
Yeah, that's
Spend
true.
half a day researching it.
Or ending up not using it at all.
Yes.
You know what? It doesn't work. Darn. For me, it's if you do, you'll see in my books, I very rarely have real people in there, because I am just so terrified of getting something wrong about them. And I mean, yes, okay, they're long dead, but still, it's a knowable thing, so I will go down those rabbit holes endlessly in those instances, just to make sure I got it right. That is hard. So I really like fictitious people instead of
I struggle so much. I think my biggest fear is that I won't get enough historical detail, that I won't pull the reader into what I can see in my head, because when I'm writing the book, all I can see is the history I'm in and the types, but I'm afraid that as I write it, I'm leaving out or don't include what I need to make the reader feel or see what I am. And that's why I just fall in love. Like when I started reading your books, or when I read Marion Chesney's books, or there's so many. Carola Dunn is another historical. She writes historical cozy mysteries in the 1920s, and then she did some set in the 1960s, and she's so good at setting the setting. Oh my gosh. Like when I read her first book, Carol knows, I sort of went into a funk. I'm like, I can't write that. I don't know what I think I'm doing. It doesn't matter. I published this many books or whatever. Like, I just, it's just like ridiculous. But yeah, I think that's the hardest thing for me, is making sure that it feels on paper what I can see in my head.
Hard.
That's why we have beta readers.
Yeah.
Right?
And how is that setting impacting the characters? Like, are you actually doing your job of having that setting, your characters within that setting, and not just like you're talking about a 21st century character within the setting? You have to have them interacting with any setting, but especially historical setting.
For sure. To get that sense of the history. Absolutely. And there's always something we can do to improve, right? Our writing, we can always
That's how I
Road.
think about it. If I see somebody like that, it's like, okay, how can I learn from that
Mm.
author to try to help me get better? I try not to despair.
Yeah,
Yes,
it just
Yeah.
makes me want to try
Yeah.
harder.
Yeah.
Try harder.
yeah.
Alicia asked me if I'm still working on the historical fiction Egyptian book that we spoke about before. I wrote Masquerade in Egypt, and it's with a couple of publishers. And if they don't take it, then I may self-publish, or I may try to get an
Good.
agent. I don't know what I'm doing with this book, but I think I know what I'm doing. So we'll see. But yeah, I had this lifelong love affair with ancient history, right? And I had done so much research and thought I was going to write my historical paranormals into Egypt in the Victorian era. And all of a sudden I realized that it wasn't my story to tell, because the characters were all going to be Black, and that's not my story to write. And so I'm like, oh, well, I don't want to give up all my research. So what can I write? Like, if I'm not going to go with this. So then I came up with this story of there are two. One is an archaeologist. He's a professor. And then she's totally fascinated in the 1920s, and she's fascinated by archaeology. She's self-taught, and she wants to go desperately to this dig that her father is sending her brother to, who's her twin. So she basically does the masquerade as her brother, so she can go to the dig, and she can pursue her dream. And of course, romance ensues, as does a lot of adventure and mystery, because like this is like, so yeah, but yeah, I'm really excited about it. But we'll see what happens, because I'm giving the publishers that I've sent it to, because I sent it to my former editors, and I'd really love to work with them again. But if I can't, I can't. Because if they don't get back to me, I don't want to wait. I mean, because you'll know on a raw, when you write on spec, you can wait forever to hear your book, you know. So I'm going to give them until November, and then I'll let them know, and then we'll see. And it may be out next year because I self-publish. So.
And you don't want somebody else to write that story before you.
No, right? This is the thing.
That's what happened to Piper
Diane
with
Carroll.
Diane Carroll.
Series, I think, is really exciting. It's a really fun series. The second book is a masquerade in England, and it's a whole different kind of masquerade. But they both have the mystery. They both have the protagonists, which are the female protagonists. It's not a straight up romance, right? Because it's kind of women's fiction with a happy ending. So there's like romance is part of the book, but it's not the only. Anyway, it's just, I get excited about what I write. I really love writing. I love what we do. It's, I think we're super blessed we get to do what we love.
Yeah, I think so too.
And storytelling is such a fascinating thing, such a great part of life. Okay, so I don't know. Do y'all have any other questions you want to talk about, answer, discuss anything not romance, historical related? Man, my brain is going off already.
Talk about what's next. You say you did.
Yeah, right. We're going to definitely do that. I definitely want to hear what y'all are doing next. So let's just start with Diane. What's up next for you?
My next book will be out in June, July of next year. That is a Newlyweds Guide to Fortune and Murder. And one of the things I do when I get an idea for a book is I write a blurb. And I feel like, okay, if I can write a blurb, then I can probably write the book.
Right.
So I can read my blurb. So for this one, George is on a mission for the British Museum. Frances agrees to sponsor Lady Wingate's niece, Kate, for a presentation to Queen Victoria. Since her husband's death, Lady Wingate has been so lethargic, she hasn't left the house for months. Her friend, Lady Esther, who you met in book 4, is convinced one of the women's stepchildren is drugging her and tapping into her fortune. Kate isn't above suspicion either. She's about to enter high society and stands to gain an inheritance upon her aunt's death. Hundreds of young ladies would kill to be in her shoes, and Frances has to wonder if that's exactly what's happening. So she, George, and Lady Esther join forces to flush out the villain to keep Lady Wingate from following in her husband's footsteps directly to the grave.
Oh, cool. Yay.
Can't wait to read that. Okay.
Some news.
Piper, what's up next for
I
you?
love that. Next fall, hopefully, because I'm still writing it now, is American Daughters, which is the story about the interracial friendship between Portia Washington, who is the daughter of Booker T. Washington, and Alice Roosevelt, who's the daughter of Theodore Roosevelt. This is an unknown thing that these two women managed to be friends in the wake of their fathers whenever Theodore first became president, when McKinley got shot in 1901. He had the temerity, I guess, as a new president, he didn't know, to invite Booker T. Washington to dinner, whereupon he created a scandal because I guess he had realized that Booker T. Washington was the first Black man to be invited to the White House to dinner, and he took stripes for that. But their two daughters, teenage daughters, who were both giving them grief in all kinds of ways, managed to find this bond, and they had this friendship into like the middle 20th
I
century.
love that.
Isn't Theodore Roosevelt the one when somebody complained about his daughter Allison? He said, "Look, I can run the country,
Yep.
but I can take care of Allison.
Yep.
I can't do both."
Yep, exactly. That's exactly it. That's her.
Oh, I
So,
can't wait to read that.
mhm.
Yeah.
Yes,
How
thank
about you, Allison? What's up next for you?
Well, currently on the shelves, the last book in the Sons of Gregor MacLeod. So this is Highland Thief. That's the 5th book in the series, and the series is now complete. But I'm working on a new Scottish historical romance series called Second Sons, and it's in the same world as the Sons of Gregor MacLeod. I had initially wanted it, or they had wanted it to come out sometime this fall, but it's been a year and I just have not finished the book yet. We had a death in the family and a whole bunch of other stuff going on. So things have really slowed down for me and starting to pick up. And so I don't know when that will come out, but the first book will be called The Laird's Hellion. And I don't know the title of the other ones, but The Laird's Hellion, and that should hopefully come out in 2023 sometime.
Awesome. Life happens.
Fingers crossed.
Yes.
You can get it. You can do it. You'll get
Yes.
it. And Carrie, how about you? What's up next for you?
In December, I've got my cover. I don't know if you can see it. A Hero and His Dog.
Yeah.
It's he's an amputee, and he thought his dog had been killed, and he finds out, somebody says, "No, I think it's still alive," that it's in this small town in Vermont. And so he travels there, and he's like, he's going to get that dog back no matter what, and he's just gonna do it. And then, of course, when he goes to the farmhouse, the door is answered by a little girl in a homemade fairy dress and red boots and a tinfoil crown, and he's like, what do I do now? You know? And so he ends up staying to help on the farm, and of course, and it's a 3-legged dog, so the dog is there to teach him that since he lost part of his leg, that life goes on, and
I know, it's so cool. I love it.
Because it started as a totally different story, and then when I went to fill out my artifact sheet, when I went to fill out my artifact sheet, I had to email my editor and say, "Oh yeah, when you read that, it's a different story than what I originally told you."
That does happen.
Well, thank you all for coming, and thank you everyone for who has tuned in either live or later to watch this. We love chatting books, and we look forward to doing so again next month, where we'll talk about holiday romance, any holiday. Right? Isn't that what we're doing?
No,
next?
October is
October.
Paranormal.
You're right. Yes. It's November we're doing holidays.
And then, November is holiday.
Okay. But thank you all, Piper, Diane, Allison. Thank you so much for being here. It has been fun. And
yes,
thank you so much.
Now I have a whole list of books to and movies to
I had that.
no. Well,
Thanks so much.
Take us